Hello and welcome to the Authentic Uprising Show. I'm your host, Jill Simons. I am so excited to grow in the radical art of standing in what God says about you with you today. This show is a place where we pour into our concept of who we are, how we've been created with intention by God, and how we can live out of the freedom that He has for us more every single day. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Authentic Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Jill Simons, and I'm coming to you from the past. Now, that's probably always the case, right? We're never listening to this live, but I am extra aware of it in recording this episode because not only will I not be sharing this with you live, I'm also out on maternity leave at the time that this is airing. So hopefully I have just the loveliest little baby boy in my arms right now, and I would really appreciate your prayers for him and for me, our other children, for my husband, everybody that's affected by just all of the joy and all of the change that accompanies bringing a new baby home. So today I'm going to be talking with you about our topic for July, which is very close to what we've talked about last month in June when we were talking about self-worth, but I want to take on just the specific flavor of the self-worth lie that comes up so much. And it's this kind of utilitarian bent on the lie that we covered last month, which was this idea that last month we talked about how people feel a lot of times that they won't be able to reach the point of self-worth that they want to be at until some kind of external metric is reached, right? So I'm not going to feel worthy until I've reached a certain weight or a certain success level or a certain XYZ, whatever the situation might be. This month, similar, I want to talk about self-worth still, but this time how we so often attach it to our productivity and the work that we do. And this is something that gives me just an enormous amount of imposter syndrome to talk about because this is such a huge struggle for me. I really struggle with this. And so this is going to be something that it is something I've done a ton of work around, and I've really had a lot of healing on this front in my own life. But at the same time, when I have challenging periods, it came up a lot during this last pregnancy, when I have these challenging times where it feels like results are not matching what it is that I expect or the effort that I'm putting in or whatever the case might be, I really struggle with going back to this lie that we are what we produce or that we get what we deserve. And that was the very specific flavor that was exposed by our Lord to me in prayer throughout this last pregnancy, was really this lie that we get what we receive, which we've talked about in the past because it goes hand in hand with this whole idea of ask and seek and knock and going after actually from God what it is that we want and need from Him, and not having this posture of really once I've earned it, God will just send it down the pipeline kind of thing, where there's really a lot of poverty and a very servile bent to that mindset. So we want to transition from that into same thing we were talking about last month. We want to detach these things, right? We want to detach our self-worth from what it is that we do, what it is that we create, the results we achieve, etc., so that we're able to really live out of this pure place of being children of God, being His beloved first and foremost, and that is not dependent. And so to do that, we're going to spend some time today with one of my favorite verses in the New Testament, which I think we so often just kind of gloss over and we're just like, cool, that happened. Going to spend time really digging into, if this is true, what else has to be true? And that's going to be a really powerful place for us to spend time reflecting, not just today, but throughout this entire month, because it's our verse to memorize. So looking at how this lie shows up in our lives, this can be all kinds of things. When you get good grades, you'll be worthy. When you are being a good enough mom, you'll feel worthy. When you are succeeding at work, you'll feel worthy. When you get this promotion, you'll feel worthy. When you reach this income level, you'll feel worthy. Whatever the case might be, you attach your self-worth to something that is the result of your work. So there's this earning aspect. That's when we're really living out of this place of the older son, right? In the prodigal son, where we're working on the farm, we're doing the vocation God has given us, we're raising the kids, we're doing the work, we're living the mission, whatever the case might be. And we think that once we've done that well enough, that we're going to be rewarded, right? That's the point at which we're going to see these blessings from God. That's the point at which we're going to see just our work to be fruitful, whatever the case might be. We see it very much as like a vending machine. We're going to put it in and we're going to get it back, because it's this one-to-one exchange where I put in my piece and I get back what it is that I want or need. But what we want to do is move from that place into a place of really realizing the abundance of God, the good fatherhood of God, where we are free to go to him and ask. And so in order to deal with all this, we're going to be looking at Matthew 3:16 and 17. So actually 2 verses. You get to memorize 2 verses this month, but they're tied together, so it's not as hard as 2 separate verses. But these verses say, when Jesus, when he was baptized, went up directly from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened to him. He saw the Spirit of God descending as a dove and coming on him. Behold, a voice out of the heavens said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." All right, those are the verses. Might seem like cool story. That's Jesus. Can we get back to my thing? Well, let's look at what it is that the whole New Testament tells us about Jesus, what it is that we know Jesus came to do, and apply it to this story. So first of all, Jesus is what? The firstborn amongst many brothers. He is the one who came to open up the pathway for us to have the same kind of relationship with God that he did. So the level of closeness and intimacy with God that Jesus had was not possible for those in the Old Testament. Hearing from God was something that was very a niche thing. It was just the prophets that had this special ability to hear from God. That wasn't something that everyone had available to them. There was this very real issue of the wall that sin put up between his people and God. And there was no door in this wall, right? So even though the Lord was in covenant with them and sharing himself with them, it wasn't free in the same kind of way that we experience now, because what changed? Christ came. He puts a door in that wall. He says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." He comes so that we can pray the Our Father. He gives us that prayer so that we can relate to God as Father the same way that he does. And that's how he refers to God. Virtually his entire mission is he's always talking about, I can only do what I see the Father doing, and giving his apostles the Our Father to pray and teaching them about his prayer, letting them watch him in prayer, learning how to relate to the Father. And so the method that we have as Christians that invites us into this reality is baptism, right? When we are baptized, that's when we become a child of God in that very real sense, into the brotherhood that Christ created. And so Jesus was without sin, but like so many things in his life and ministry, he was showing us what it is that we're supposed to do. So just as he could have just like squashed the devil in the desert by just squashing him in his divine nature, he chooses to fight the devil as a man, right? He uses the tool that human beings have at their disposal, which is scripture and knowledge of God and knowledge of scripture. And that's how he fights. And so he's showing us, should we be in the same situation, what is it that we need to do? Same thing is happening here. He seeks baptism to show us how you enter into relationship with God. And then God responds to that by claiming his child. That is exactly what happens when you got baptized, or when you will get baptized if you have not been yet. That's exactly what happens, is that very real parent-child relationship comes into being. The adoption is finalized when we are baptized. And so here we have Jesus at the very beginning of his public ministry. He has not done anything yet, guys. This is the part that blows my mind, that I don't hear talked about often enough. He has not done anything yet. He hasn't healed anybody. He hasn't raised anybody from the dead. He hasn't fed any large groups of people. He's just a guy right now who is in relationship with the Father, seeks baptism. And what does the Father say? This is my beloved Son with whom I'm well pleased. Before he died on the cross, before he was in public ministry in any sense, before he had done any of the hundreds of things that showed people the reality of who he was. He just was. He just was in relationship with God. And this is the same relationship that God is inviting us into. Not that we're going to become deities like God, like we're not going to become God, obviously, but we are invited into the family because of Christ. And so that what God says about Jesus in this situation, he also says about you in the same situation. So the day you got baptized, whether you were whatever age, whatever point in life, whatever was going on in your life, whenever you received that gift of baptism, whether you were aware of it or not, this is what the Father was functionally saying over you. Behold, this is my beloved child with whom I am well pleased. Done. You haven't done anything yet as a Christian. You just became one like 10 seconds ago. And I think that this is a really, really powerful place to center our reflection about what it is to break free from this idea that our results, what we create, what we achieve, is what determines our worth, even as Christians, because that's where I think that it is extra insidious, is that so often we have wonderfully formed Christians, love Jesus, all the things, that still live the older brother life. Just like the older brother who loved the Father. He's not out of relationship with the Father. He's just not thinking about it in the correct context. And that's what we see with so many Christians, is that they love God, but there's still just this slight turnout in how they're thinking about relationship with him that's opening this door to so much heartache, so much frustration, so much struggle, that God is not willing for them at all, because that was never supposed to be how it was supposed to work. It was never supposed to be a pay-to-play, earn your place kind of system. It was supposed to be a family. It still is a family. And just like families in our world, people can show up to them in all different ways, and you can't force them to show up to them differently. But there is kind of a best way to be in the family. And it's the exact same in the family of God. The best way to be in the family is the way that Jesus was in the family, where he shows us how he accepts his identity from God, from who God says he is, and then is overwhelmed with the love and the gratitude that pours out, the compassion, also speak about that so much, he is overwhelmed by the depth that he feels and experiences all those things because of the depth of his relationship with the Father. That heart is really shared between the two of them. And so then that's where he ministers from. Not from a place of needing to prove anything, needing to know anything about himself, but from this place of, gosh, my dad is so passionate about this. And he shared with me so extensively about it. It's just so on my heart too. And we experience this in life, right? You have a parent who's big into activism for heart disease or diabetes or mental illness or something like that. And when it's really this authentic compassion for the cause, so often it's carried on by the children, because in being in proximity to that, it wears off on you, right? You come to know it and believe it and understand it and feel compassion for it at a deep place that would not likely have happened on its own. Not that it could not have, but that really tips the scales, right? And so we see Jesus ministering from this place of the heart of the Father, not because he's trying to be like, Dad, look at me. Dad, look, see, wasn't that good? Didn't I do a good job doing that? He's doing it from a place of knowing what the Father cares about and then coming to care about the same things in his human nature. And so that's the place that I encourage you to seek in your relationship with God, is that place of detachment from what it is that you create and still being moved into action by what moves God's heart into action. It's a really challenging thing, and you will not be successful at it if you try and do it under your own power. Tried it, know it, doesn't work. What you need to do is allow God to teach this dynamic to you in prayer. And so we're going to start that work together on the third podcast of this month, third Tuesday of the month, like we always do. And in the meantime, go after it yourself. Ask the Lord, where am I trying to perform and prove that I have worth and value? And how do you want me to approach that differently? Because a lot of us, it's going to be maybe the same outside looking life, but how we show up to it can be completely different. So for instance, you might not, throw out your job, throw out your family, all these other things that are going on in your life, but you might show up to them completely differently if you have this specific shift in mindset. Instead of trying to prove that you're a great mom by checking off all the Pinterest things on the list, by having your kids involved in all the things, by volunteering for everything at school, maybe you let some of those things go that are coming from a proving place. But some of them you might keep, or you might even add when you feel the heart of the Father really urging you to move in that kind of direction. And all of a sudden, there's this freedom that can be found in ministering from this place. And I use the word ministering. This isn't exclusive to ministry, but things like being a good mom, being a member of a family, even what you do at work is ministry to a certain extent when it's tasks that you really decide, what do I do and how deep do I go into this and how much do I connect with the people that I'm doing it with? You think about, in a typical corporate job, you think about needing to network and needing to get to know people and shake hands, et cetera, et cetera. And you can do that from a place of, I need to make all the connections that I need to earn this next rung on the ladder, this next stop in my career. Or you can do that from a place of really genuinely wanting to encounter other people that God has made. Because you aren't putting your self-worth on reaching the next rung. And it might result still in you doing that. You still might move up in the world, but it's from a place where you don't need it anymore. You don't have to have it. It's from a place of you genuinely encountered someone and made a real connection with them because you're living out of the heart of the Father instead of out of your own heart that's searching and seeking to feel like it's good enough. So that's my encouragement for you today, is to really spend time in prayer, asking the Lord to reveal to you the places in your life that this is going on. Maybe there are places just right off the bat, you're like, I do this here and et cetera, et cetera. You might know that. But I think that even if you know that you do this, it's really, really valuable to have the Lord speak into it with specificity about where and why, and let him heal those things. Because again, if we enter into this, I've also done this. If you enter into this work trying to be like, I'm going to prove how awesome I can do and not doing this anymore, spoiler alert, it doesn't work that way. You won't be successful because it's, again, not about proving something. It's about allowing God to enter in. And so to end this episode, I want to share with you a story that happened to me when I first dove really hard into this work. I was a new student at Encounter School of Ministry, and we were really digging into identity and what does it look like to go through our identity, or come at our identity, I should say, from God's eyes versus our own eyes, and detach ourselves from this proving and performing so that we can do ministry from an authentic place, was really kind of the thrust of the work. And it just wrecked me. This quarter totally wrecked me. And I had this like several month period where I was just so frustrated because I was like, I do this to just the nth degree. Like, there's no part of my life where I don't do this. It's so entrenched. I don't even know how to be a person if I don't do this. This is just literally like who I am, and how do I stop and get out of it? I feel like I won't be myself anymore. And so I had this really wonderful experience in prayer where I took and just took this time to go and pray. And I went to our church and sat in the pew and prayed and really just allowed myself to go into my imagination, pray with Jesus there with me. And it was interesting because as I walked up to him in my mind, I'm sharing with him about this struggle and what do I do about this and stuff. This performing mentality manifested physically in the prayer, in my imagination in prayer, as a cape. So I'm like wearing this cape. And as I'm praying, I realize I'm kind of proud of this cape. I kind of like this. Like, this is kind of my thing, is that I have this awesome cape that I'm wearing. But at the same time, I know that there are things that it's holding me back from. And I'm wanting to have a conversation with Jesus about how do I move forward from that. And so I remember looking at him and saying, Lord, I just don't know what I do about this. I don't know how to take this cape off. And the Lord reaches up in my imagination and uses his thumb and just flicks the knot on the cape, and it just falls to the ground. And I have a panic attack. I have a panic attack in the pew. I have a panic attack in my imagination. Like, everywhere that I am, I'm panicking. And I'm just like, Lord, this was supposed to be a hypothetical conversation. Like, one of those, like, I want to do this, but like not right now, like only on my terms kind of things. And the Lord just laughed. Like, he knows. He is just very patient with all of us, very patient with me. And he's like, I know. I just wanted you to know that I could. And that was very powerful and meaningful to me, because it was that reminder that God's power really isn't limited by our limitations. But even though he could have just taken that off and it would have been really jarring and freak me out. He could have made that choice to not let me put it back on, but that is not what he did. He reminded me that he could, but then I picked it up, put it back on, was like, no, Lord, I want to figure out like a way to sustainably do this. That is not going to work for me. And he says, okay, what if you came here and practiced? And I feel like that statement just really shows a vision of the Lord that so many of us don't see or think about as frequently as we should. That's the kind of kindness of God that I've experienced, that I know he wants you to experience if you haven't. He just said, what if you just came here and practiced? And so that's what I did for several months. So I would go to that same place in my imagination with the Lord in prayer, and I would consciously like untie the cape, put it down, and be with him. And lo and behold, I sometimes forgot to put it back on. And that kept happening, and that kept happening. And it was, checkered, where sometimes I'd do great, sometimes I'd really fall. But regardless, I knew that the action step was to go to him and practice. And that was very, very healing and very powerful for me. And so now, when I go back to struggling with it, that's what I go back to doing. I go back to practicing with him, resubmitting, just like a child that's really trying to get this down, letting the Father show me again and again, this is how you do this. Okay, yeah, I remember. Okay, let's try again. And so I want you to approach this transformation, if you need a similar transformation in your life, not from a place of, I need to check this off the list, but from a place of letting yourself learn to be a child and learn to be led by God in the midst of it. That's when it's going to be something that's really going to change your life.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the Authentic Uprising podcast. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on a podcast app, make sure that you hit subscribe so that you can get all of our updates automatically in your app on YouTube. And we also ask that you leave us a review or a comment. If you're in a podcast app, leave us a review. That helps us get seen by more people. And on YouTube, leave us a comment. Let us know what you loved from the episode and send it on to a friend. I am sure that you know someone who really needs the message in this podcast from today. I also encourage you to check out Pink Salt Riot. That is my company that sponsors this podcast. We have an incredible online shop full of all kinds of beautiful and unique Christian lifestyle goods. You can shop our whole line at pinksaltriot.com. I'll see you next week.